Okay, and welcome to Outside 50, the US Footy News podcast. And we're continuing our Around the Grounds feature where we're looking at the 9 or so teams from 2018 and 2019. And on tonight's show, we have from the RV Lions or the Richmond Virginia Lions, Darren Green. Hey, Darren.
G'day, Kraz.
How you doing, Darren?
And
Hey, Rick.
And Ian McCormick. Hey, Ian.
Yeah, how y'all going?
Good.
Yes, and you heard in the background Rick Shaibani butting in. Well done, Rick.
Good to be here, guys.
Welcome, guys. And obviously, as a new team getting up and running in Virginia in this past year, you obviously would have had some challenges, but we'll go back a few steps and find out a little bit of background of where you've came to Aussie Rules and how you got into the Virginia area. So we'll start with you, Darren.
Sure thing. Well, firstly, it's a pleasure to be with you guys tonight. Thanks for inviting us to join you on your podcast. We're really excited about the club moving forward here in Richmond, Virginia. You wouldn't call it the metropolis as far as expats and Aussies go, but that's part of the backstory, I guess. I came to the US back in 2005, and it was a working vacation that ended up becoming permanent when I met my wife here. And I've from afar been watching and listening to what the USAFL has been doing, and wished that there were clubs closer by to us that we could, just wander down the road and have a kick. But that wasn't to be the case until just this last year when we decided to pull the trigger and make one of our own.
There you go. Awesome.
So how about you, Ian?
Well, I came to footy in kind of a classical American way. I spent a year after high school. I decided to take a year off before I went to college, and I ended up teaching outdoor education and math at Geelong Grammar School, and in their Timber Top campus. And that put me in a bunch of bunkhouses with 14-year-old boys for a full year. And what do they do on the weekend but kick a footy, And so I spent a year just kind of immersed in Victorian culture, and a large part of that's country footy and things of the like.
Well, the amazing thing is that you survived coaching 14-year-old boys for that long. So that's an accomplishment, I reckon.
I mean, they were coaching me, Rick. I played every sport under the sun in America before I got over there. Wrestled, I played soccer, hockey, lacrosse, baseball, ski, snowboard, played tennis, did everything. So I'm someone who's keen on sport, and I got over there and just fell in love with like the way the Australian football culture is down there and just the way the sport is. I mean, adopted by everybody in that whole area. And I just fell in love with it from Jump Street.
Oh, there's nothing else like it, for real.
Timber Top has a bit of famous history. You're probably aware.
It does.
Enlighten some of our listeners here in the States about it.
Absolutely. So Timber Top is the Year 9 campus for Geelong Grammar School, and historically, Prince Charles spent a year there when in his formative years, when he was like 19, 20, 21, studying for his exams. And then a little bit of more recent history, I lived in the same house that Boris Johnson lived at when he was a gappy at Timber Top. So got a connection with the current prime minister, but lived in the same house he did.
Wow. But the real question, of course, is do you barrack for Geelong now?
I do not.
Ooh, okay.
So in my own selection process, I'm a Red Sox fan and a Patriots fan. So I'm a New England sports guy. And when I got to Australia, I arrived like halfway through the year in July. So like in June, July. So we're about round 8, I want to say, was when I dropped into the scene. And I wanted to pick a team. And I didn't want to like jump out in the front runner. And I mean, that was Gary Ablett prime days. Geelong was a front runner. I was at Geelong Grammar, and I'm a contrarian at heart. So I was soliciting opinions from some of the other faculty. And the one thing that hooked me was Collingwood. they'd never changed their jumpers since their formation. So I'm a Magpie at heart, and ready to die on that mountain.
Oh no. Oh no.
We won't hold that against you, Ian. Never mind.
Yeah, they were kind of like they were sitting like 8 or 9 on the ladder, and I didn't want to pick someone in the top 4 like a favorite. I wanted to root for kind of someone with an outside puncher's chance. And in that year they didn't, but the next year, so that was 2009. The next year they won the premiership. So I watched that on AFL. I watch AFL from home with a grin on my face for sure.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Well, rock around to 2019, and you probably met up with Darren at some stage. Was that a come down and have a kick at the park thing?
That was a Google thing. I've been a supporter of Australian football for years and trying to get various mates involved in college and beyond, but limited to no success besides having a kick around at the beach or when I was down in New Orleans for college. And I'd always kind of kept my eye on what the AFL was doing. I'd met some of the DC Eagles players at the time, and at a watch party for the World Cup of soccer, and had always kept in mind. I was watching it basically by myself at 2:00 in the morning at home, and a quick cursory search of the internet. I've been in Richmond for about a year now. Popped up Richmond Lions, and I went RVA Lions, and I went, no way, come on, really? And so from that point on, I reached out to Darren, and he sold me hook, line, and sinker.
That's pretty cool.
I guess you could say, Darren, that you were lucky that he didn't beat you to it when it came to creating a club.
Oh, I would have been happy to join his club. That's no problem. No, well, I guess it might have been a different Guernsey that we were wearing if he had created it, perhaps.
Yeah,
But
probably. I'm pretty happy that you jumped in first as quietly there, Darren.
I think it worked out pretty well. So far, so good, at least.
So we have to probably ask why the Lions?
All right, there's a little bit of backstory here, so if you can bear with me through a couple of historical details. In 2018, I was involved in a conversation that happened to involve the local councilman for our area here in Richmond, and I dropped in one of my old hobby horses. I think that Richmond should have a sister city in Australia, and Brisbane would be a brilliant target. Both of them referred to as the River City in their local region. Both of them in the middle of the east coast of their country. Both of them with great some transport infrastructure, international airport and ports and all the rest of it. And most importantly, the beautiful river running through both cities, which is a bit of a lifeblood of both cities. Anyway, the councilman ended up being involved with the Sister Cities Commission here in Richmond and invited me to join in. So I went in and shared about my thoughts, and they ended up inviting me to join the commission. Roll forward a little bit, I'm working towards that idea and thought it would be great for us to create some relationships with institutions and well-known organisations between the cities. And sporting is an area of passion for me, and I thought, what a better idea to do than to create our own Aussie Rules Club and reach out to the Brisbane Lions.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool story. It's funny, like, even as a Virginia native and as someone who recently spent quite a bit of time in Australia, I never really thought of the similarities between Richmond and Brisbane. Obviously, Brisbane is much bigger, but yeah, you were bang on in terms of describing how the cityscape is similar. And that was a really brilliant idea, if I do say so myself, in terms of getting those guys, the sister city people, on board and saying, hey, when we decide to create a footy club, let's just go with the logical choice.
Thanks, Rick. And it's very much a work in progress. I mean, we haven't sort of secured that a relationship of that nature, and we're still working on developing relationships with folks involved in footy back in Brisbane and Queensland and just across the country. But it's a goal, and it was a reason, and that sort of got the ball moving, you might say. Around the same time, quite coincidentally, some friends of ours who were involved in importing the the famous 4 and 20 Pies to the USA, invited us to come up as a family and join their family as they were catering for the Nationals in Racine, Wisconsin in 2018. And so we jumped at that opportunity, and first time we'd ever been to the Midwest, first time we'd ever actually been to a USAFL event, let alone a local event. To go to a Nationals was an exciting thing for us to do. We went up, and I thought while I was there, I would approach Darren, the operations and events manager nationally for the USAFL, and ask him if he thought it would be a crazy idea to explore setting up a footy club here in Richmond. As it turned out, that year we just had the Revos come here and do a training camp in Richmond, unbeknownst to me, and there was speculation that they may even bring an Eastern Regionals here in the following year. And we thought, well, geez, if that's going on, we should jump on this. And my crazy idea was to look at a 3-year plan, and it ended up being more of a 3-month plan to pull the trigger.
That's pretty funny. I remember meeting you in Racine there that day, Darren, and coming over to say hello, because I'd already seen you maybe on some social media and that before then. So, but having to accelerate pretty quickly must have probably be a little nerve-wracking at some stage, because you want to make sure that you want to get things done the right way, but sometimes you just got to jump in. And I think a lot of footy clubs around the country can probably attest to that. Sometimes you just got to start.
Yeah, and a follow-up question: when it came to actually getting things organized and becoming an official club with the USAFL, and then once you've got that in place, obviously you can officially start recruiting. So kind of take us through a little bit of that process and how the ball kind of got rolling from there.
Alrighty. So it's quite funny. We got back from Racine, and the idea kind of just percolated for a week or two. But with the potential activity so close upon us, it was just a case of, well, we're pulling the trigger or not, and thought, well, let's give this a crack. And it was at that point basically me turning to my wife and asking her permission. And also I had a mate who lived up the street who was an Aussie as well and used to play in the VFA back in the day, who was interested in becoming involved as a coach and helping get things going. So just between the three of us, we said, let's do this. And I created a domain and some social media accounts, and within 12 hours I had a couple of guys contact me who had played for different clubs in other places, and we thought, well, this is a bit of a sign, and we continued to outreach and share the idea through the last 3 months of 2018, and reach out to the USAFL and get things more technically set up early in 2019.
Yeah, that's it's definitely a process, but it's well worth it in the end. And it's funny that you mentioned that there's all sorts of people who just happen to be in the area, who might be transports from other clubs or from Australia. That's kind of a recurring theme so far, isn't it, Kraz? When it comes to these new clubs starting up, there always seems to be at least one or two people who used to play for another club interstate or used to be involved, 5 years ago.
Yeah, that's right. There's quite a few, as we've seen yet. Maybe it's through some of the attrition level, but mainly people moving from city to city as they do in their work and their college career or whatever. And you're right. We have spoken to quite a few people over the last month or so that have started a club up, only to be found like a week later, like you say, by someone who played, 2 years ago at some other club on the other side of the country. So as people do move around and get that opportunity to have a taste of the sport, then maybe some of it stays in their blood, so to speak, and they see something pop up locally, and it only takes a little bit of advertising on social media or just getting the word out, and lo and behold, you have a couple of players.
So one thing I think that Darren's done really well in terms of setting up the RVA Lions and positioning it for future success is he's kind of labeled it and positioned it as a community-based club. Doesn't matter if you know AFL, doesn't matter if you've played AFL, doesn't matter if you even intend on playing AFL. It's a support community, and that's in the name of the club. It's a supporting community for not only sport itself, but the general population. So we're building from a very disparate base of interests and motivations, but it's really going to be an organic growth that isn't even necessarily relying on those people who already know what Aussie Rules is or have come from a different community and finding those few and far betweens. It's really about organic growth and positioning itself to be just a sustainable community organization. And I think that is something that's kind of like a forward thinking development.
Oh yeah, I reckon you hit the nail on the head there, Ian. It's when you talk about organic growth, there's not really many other options when you're a startup club. And of course, a lot of that comes from social media recruitment, from social events in the community. Once you have things like that, and once you have that solid foundation of, half a dozen, 20 or so guys or ladies, of course, who are really passionate, once you're there, you can branch out so much more and really focus on getting to the fundamentals in terms of on-field stuff.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't be in more agreement. I mean, we find ourselves sitting out at the field and we're sharing a space, kind of whoever gets there first or who doesn't, to practice a kick on Sundays with Ultimate Frisbee and just chatting with them every day. It's like we're going to slowly integrate more and more people from different sporting groups and just take over the city.
It's called stealing, but that's okay.
Australia is a colony of thieves, so I reckon we're
Wow.
I reckon we're on pace.
Oh, he went there. He definitely went there. But yeah, no, it's funny that you mentioned that. That's definitely a first one on the podcast, Ultimate Frisbee. Like whenever we talk to guys who are trying to grow clubs, it's always like, oh, rugby, or if there's a Gaelic team nearby, they might recruit some of the Gaelic guys. But I've never heard of anyone approaching ultimate teams. And obviously that's a sport that requires a decent amount of athleticism. So there you go.
Yeah, ultimate frisbee is actually pretty big up through the Midwest, and I know through Minnesota and parts of that area. For Catherine Hogg, for instance, is involved in a very large ultimate frisbee organization, and that sport does have a lot of similarities, as you say, to Aussie rules, because even though you're throwing something, you still have to come forward to present yourself to get to catch the frisbee or whatever they want to call it. It plays on a fairly large field and is a pretty much a running sport. So
It's a flowing game. It's
yeah,
360. There's not the offsides
very
like
much so.
Aussie rules also. So there's definitely overlaps.
All right, so moving on to 2019, we've got the club sort of up and running, and the ideas and the passions in there, and um, we started practice at some sort of stage, did we, Darren? I know we saw you came up to I think we met you in the Raleigh Eastern Regionals, and you joined with the Atlanta Kookaburras for a couple of games. Was
Yes,
that the
indeed.
first time you actually had a run on the park?
It wasn't actually. When we decided to make a splash and to let Richmond know that we were here, we were looking at how we might be able to most effectively do that and get some exposure. At this stage, we're also thinking that we might be gearing up to a regionals last year that didn't work out at that time, but maybe in the future. So we're thinking, what can we do in terms of creating both a stepping stone to the club and a stepping stone to this larger event? And we thought, what a better idea than to have an exhibition tournament. And that idea kind of spiraled out of a conversation I had with Painey up at Baltimore and with Scott in North Carolina. They were thinking maybe they could host a game here in Richmond rather than traveling to either of those extremities. They could meet in the middle. And we thought, let's take it one step further and let's have a mini tournament. And we invited DC along as well. And between those three clubs and our fledgling club, we hosted the inaugural Mid Atlantic Cup here in Richmond, and we're preparing to host the second annual one this year.
Yeah, it's funny to hear something like that these days because the last few podcasts, Kraz and I have been talking to people from Salt Lake City or Portland or relatively isolated places where the nearest footy club is probably like 6, 7 hours away. So, considering Richmond is so centrally located in terms of being near Baltimore, being near DC, being near the NC Tigers, that's a really convenient place to be. And as we've talked about on a few previous podcasts, what better for a fledgling club than to host their own tournament in their first or their second year of existence?
Mm-hmm. So that was the very first event that we did in April of last year. Um, we managed to spread the word out through some of the sporting community in Richmond, and we had a decent showing. It was still a brand new concept for many people, so there's still people just working out what it's all about. And so we just see a great opportunity for growth through that. My intention was helping to organise that tournament and more do it from the sidelines, um, along with the other members of our board at that time. And the clubs that came, as is often the case, some travelling clubs don't always have the full numbers that they need, but they still go and to make the best of the situation to create a decent event. So one of the clubs came up and said, "Hey, Darren, we need a couple extra players, so you're on field from the first hooter, from the ball up." And so I hadn't played football since I was in middle school, to be perfectly honest with you, and I'd been pretty passive over the last few years, desk bound, you might say. And my coming back to football was a bit of a rude shock. I was the tournament tackle bag, you might say, for the Mid Atlantic Cup, but it was a great opportunity to test the surface, and I had a great time. Sore for a few days, you might say, but it was a great it was a great experience nonetheless.
Yeah, that's pretty good because, like Rick says, you're in that central location in between North Carolina and the DC, Baltimore area. So, and there's really probably nothing to your west, is there? No other major cities. So you're in that travel zone, and you're probably likely to attract that type of event. Well, good responses from that type of event. You say it's on this year. What's the date of this year's event?
So this year it's the 4th of April, and we hope to continue to do that as an annual event.
Right, that's pretty early on, so that'll be a good hit out for those couple of clubs that are coming to that. We presume you got North Carolina and Baltimore and DC coming to it again?
We do have the same teams again. We'd like to be able to furnish our own full team here in Richmond, but we're just not quite at the tipping point yet. So again, I think we'll be uh, supplying some bench fillers. Let's say, to get the other teams fully rotating and get some experience here in Richmond. And we look to push on through the course of the year and participate in the DC and North Carolina schedules as extras, and hopefully get our own metro type league going in this region as well. Something like you guys have got going in Atlanta, Kras.
Yeah, sure.
And yeah, I mean, obviously, you guys also have Virginia Beach right in your own backyard. So it'd definitely be great to dip into Williamsburg or Virginia Beach or places like that because that alone has, a few 100,000 people in that greater area. So you might as well give it a go. And slightly switching gears here for you, Ian, when it comes to recruiting your fellow Yanks. How much success have you guys had in terms of recruiting Americans and retaining them as well? Because that can definitely be a challenge when you're starting a club.
No, absolutely. Like I said, I haven't had many contacts in the football industry at all. I've been more of a tangential sideline supporter, just kind of watching games from afar. But since Darren's got me involved, just what I've seen from the people he's brought along, um, we had 4 new people at a kick today that weren't at the kick last Sunday. So I think there's tremendous potential given the university situation. Within 60 miles, you have 5 major universities, like 50, 60,000 students. not to mention the high school crowd matriculating every year, kind of athletes that don't have necessarily any guidance to their future athletic endeavors. The market's ripe for the picking. It's just about being active in your market.
Oh, definitely. And I think what I've always said in terms of growing the game organically in the US is kind of reversing the American sports mentality. Because obviously there's no adult sporting culture in the States. There just isn't. And
Right.
of course,
you can drink and play kickball.
That's true. That's true. And you can play ultimate frisbee. But yeah, in terms of like the mentality is obviously you play in elementary school, you play in middle school, you play in high school. If you're good enough, you go to college. And if you're not good enough to make it to the NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, or anything like that, you're done. Whereas, of course, in Australia, retiring at 22 is unthinkable. So it's definitely all about getting people more open just to the idea of adult sports in general. And considering
I couldn't agree more.
And considering, people are more concerned about fitness these days, you've got more people, 20s and 30s who are into CrossFit or running marathons or doing all sorts of fitness stuff. It's great to be able to kind of tap into that niche market and say, hey, how about you run still a fair amount of distance and you hit people while you do it?
Absolutely, picking up on what you're saying there, Rick. Another strategy that we're employing in terms of reaching out to the broader sports community, as Ian alluded to earlier, we're looking to create a sporting community and supporters club. So looking more broadly than just the Aussie Rules, well, that is going to be our primary focus. Looking to create a platform to enable other folks to get involved in health and fitness, and hopefully, as we create a crowd builds a crowd, and we can draw from that group into the train with the team, run with the Lions, and see if we can't get some folks to catch the footy bug as well. Personally,
and buy a T-shirt
and a hat. So we're particularly making inroads into the running community, which is particularly active here in Richmond. There's a really good running scene. Rick, you mentioned folks who participate in marathons and do other things. I mean, I think it's no accident that we're sort of heading in this direction, although maybe not one that I intended at the start. It's one that's become obvious, considering that professional Aussie Rules football players in Australia would be running 10K to a half marathon every game. I think it's not a silly idea for us to aim as footy players on an amateur level to be able to run 5Ks or 3 miles, to be able to keep up with the play and to contribute to our teams. When I had made the decision to get the team going, it coincided with a Christmas trip back to Australia, and while I was there, a buddy of mine who I used to share a house with mentioned to me about an organisation or a movement, you might say, called Parkrun. Now, I'm not sure if you guys or if your listeners have heard of Parkrun, but it's in brief, it's an organisation, a community-based running wellness type organisation that started in the UK about 15 years ago, when a dozen guys who had gone to college together met, little reunion, looked around at each other and decided after 10 years out of college, we're getting fat and lazy. We need to get active again. Speaking to that adult sporting mentality that you mentioned earlier, Rick. Fast forward 15 years, these guys, a dozen guys, turned into now thousands of people around the world in hundreds of locations that get together on a Saturday morning to run a free timed 5K run with more of a community focus, and the mantra that a 15-minute 5K is the same distance as a 60-minute 5K, trying to encourage people just to get out and get active and get healthy. And so I started doing that myself just to get fit for footy. And that was the beginning of the year last year, going from zero activity and doing that. And personally, my fitness has improved so much, and I've met a great community of people and have been invited into many different running groups to the point where I was able to actually run my first half marathon last year, and I'm aiming to run a couple of marathons this year in Australia and in the US. So, yeah, I'm just excited about the opportunity to connect with people who are looking to improve their own health and well-being, and to share with them an opportunity to run, but maybe while carrying a football.
Yeah, Darren, I couldn't agree more. As someone who's not been in the fitness game for a little while now, there is an intrinsic link for me with physical fitness, especially running and Aussie Rules. When I was at Timbertop, part of what I did was we went on 3 runs a week, and then it culminated with the Timbertop Marathon. It's 28K through the mountains, up and down hills, and it just seems to be a very tied in aspect of Australian football and Australian culture, just the physical fitness. And I'm a perfect example of someone who was fit their entire life, finished college, finished playing intramural sports, stuff like that, and just fell by the wayside. I've been doing reps, not runs, for the past 8 years in the gym. And it's really a good impetus. And when Darren was first talking to me about this, he kept inviting me to these runs and the park run, and oh, we do a little run and maybe we'll kick a ball. And I go, am I joining a running club with a footy problem or a footy club with a running problem? I can't really shake this one out. But it really is kind of intrinsic to the whole setup.
Yeah, well, actually, park run Greenie started down in Atlanta just towards the end of last year. I'd actually done quite a few park runs back in Australia when I go home and visit family. I have a brother who's run 250 to nearly 300, I think. So I've been running a long time, and I've ran some when I've been back home, and one started up in Atlanta. I think towards the end of last year, and I've been actually encouraging the Atlanta group. It's an hour and a bit drive for me now, but to get down there on Saturday morning, and it's a fun little group. It's only 20 to 40 people at the moment, but some of the runs around, and they have visitors from all over the country. In fact, all over the world.
That's right.
There is always a runner there who's in business in Atlanta, who's from the UK or from South Africa. And it's a great way to meet people and especially get involved in physical activity. And you're right, you can run 15 minutes or you can take 60 and no one really cares.
Mm-hmm. It's a very supportive and encouraging environment as well, which is important.
Definitely, that it's a phenomenal idea. And like you've been talking, Darren, about community outreach, community engagement in terms of building a footy club from the ground up. With stuff like the running, at worst, you're going to have some brand new Richmond supporters. At best, you're going to have some new players and maybe even a few people who might want to umpire. Who knows?
Absolutely. And to that point, when we started getting involved and connecting with the with the running community, I made it very clear why I was running, and one of our sort of club catch cries is "Run with a reason, play with a purpose." So I'm let people know what my reason was for running, and I actually from the get go, even though I wasn't running very fast, actually I was walking more than I was running. Managed to start to turn that around now, but when I showed up, I showed up carrying my Aussie Rules Football, and very quickly I got known as that nut, that guy that runs with a football. Reinforcing or previously held suspicions. But so I got known very quickly that as the guy with the footy, and my favourite hashtag is running with balls. It gets conversation starting, and as I got invited to these other running groups, I'd show up as this new guy who's running with a football, and people would just turn to me and go, "What do you got your rugby ball for?" Conversation starter right there. I found it helped, one, create an opportunity to just have an icebreaker and to meet people. Two, it started a conversation, and it just opened up the door to being able to explain to people what Australian football was all about, and invite them to come and join the club. And it's not creating a flood or overnight, but incrementally people are becoming more and more interested. And that old question of, what do you got a rugby ball for, now is being answered by someone who's running 12 people behind me going, it's not a rugby ball. So that whole marketing campaign seems to be getting a little bit of its own identity.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that in terms of like conversation starters, because just last week in LA, I was at not a park, but like at a middle school field right down the street from where I live, and that's sometimes where we practice with the Dragons in LA. And a girl was just there, and she saw me just walking around the track, bouncing the footy, kicking it to myself, looking like a complete lunatic to anyone who doesn't know what footy is. And she's like, "Oh, what's this?" And as it turned out, she's like a personal trainer and a fitness freak. And I was just, it sparked like a 40-minute conversation of showing her what a handball is, showing her how to kick it, telling her how it looks like organized chaos at first if you're not Australian, but it's one of the best sports on the planet. And we exchange numbers, and hopefully we'll see her down at LA Dragons training soon.
I'm sure 35 minutes of that conversation was about because she was pretty cute, right?
I mean, yeah, but we won't go there.
It started a conversation.
It did. That's the point.
Yeah, to Darren's point, I would just say every time I've been with Darren, all of a sudden I'll just turn around and he's talking to someone new about Aussie rules. Like he'll just disappear and I go, "Where's Darren?" And he's just off with like some different people holding a football talking about Aussie rules. So it's about spreading the message. It's about having the conversation starter, and or like we said, organic growth. Just you got to make it happen yourself. You may get a couple inbound requests, but it'll be a couple. But you got to really make the growth for yourself.
Again, kind of switching gears a little bit again, Darren. Just wanted to touch on briefly. Again, you're very active on social media with whether it's in Facebook groups promoting footy in the US or whether it's just promoting Richmond itself as a footy club. I remember you guys a few months ago had a film screening for the movie The Merger, which was about Aussie rules. Could you touch on that a little bit and explain how that came about, how the screening went, if you were able to connect with people through that? Because that's a unique opportunity. And being a film guy myself, I was like, "Oh, what's this?" I mean, not only is Richmond starting a club, but they're basically running their own little mini film festival. What the hell?
I would very much love to see an Aussie film festival happening over here. Yeah, that was part of our early steps as well in trying to create a springboard for what we're doing on a broader level. And this particular opportunity presented itself that allowed us to sort of share a little bit of our ethos as well as sharing about footy and about club culture. And I think club culture is a huge selling point for our game in terms of introducing it and embedding it here in the US, helping the American participants in the game to understand what a footy club means to the community back in Australia, and helping to have that level of involvement in our own communities here in the US. So about the film, the Merger is a Australian comedy that was beautiful timing, just came out 18 months ago, I guess. And it's a film that's based around a country footy club in Australia. The context is this particular country region was suffering because of industry shutdown, and the flow-on effect to the town was as I say, suffering, and that impacted the footy club directly. It meant that people were moving away from the region, the memberships were dropping, this condition of their facilities was being neglected, and they were faced with an opportunity or with a demand either to shut the club down or to merge with another footy team nearby, which were their biggest rivals. So they didn't like that idea, and they wanted to find another solution. And without spoiling too much about the movie, the movie becomes focused on the club's opportunity to reach out to other people in their community. In this case, there was a refugee settlement in that area where folks had been given opportunity to live in that place, and the club started to build bridges with a group of people that hadn't traditionally been involved or exposed to footy, and gave them the opportunity to be involved in their sporting community. So I thought it had a really good story. It was very timely as well. I mean, there's been a lot of talk in the media about refugees and about migrants, and I thought this is a lighthearted take on a topic that is in the news. It also has some really good takeaways in terms of the way they deal with the issues, and it's a feel good movie, even though and a comedy. So yeah, we jumped on that and held the Mid Atlantic premiere of that movie here at a historic movie theatre in downtown Richmond. So that was a fun opportunity that it seemed to present itself to us.
It's certainly a unique opportunity, Darren. I don't think I've heard of anything like that being done before. So, yeah, great kudos there for jumping on something like that and
Thanks,
getting the
Chris.
opportunity as well. Great connections, I'm sure, would have
Mhm.
come out of that. So
Mhm.
let's move on to 2020. We've talked about the past enough. Let's talk about the future. What is in store this year? You mentioned you have your tournament in early April.
Mhm.
What are we looking to do after that?
Well, we've actually just in the last week had our club's first annual general meeting following the formation 12 months ago. We have welcomed 6 new directors onto the board, and I think all of them have not been involved in Aussie rules, either in Australia or in the US, in any sort of club sense. So I'm excited to have the new excited faces and the energy that brings. Folks who really want to see this continue to move forward. Um, we're talking a lot with our surrounding clubs in particular, and on the back of the tournament that's about to happen, we're looking to build, as I mentioned, build a metro social type comp, flag football, touch football type introduction to footy for those who've never been exposed to it before, and who maybe don't want to get in the rough and tumble straight up without knowing what's going on. And we're looking to, as a group, I won't say team yet because we haven't got a full squad, but as a group of players, we're looking to get involved in the games nearby in DC and North Carolina. Help them fill their benches and to participate with them. Maybe present a team in a metro comp with our nearby neighbours, and start to use that as an opportunity to create a club identity, get our own Guernseys, and move forward with a view of presenting a full squad for 2021 and getting a schedule out that puts us up with the big boys and girls.
There you go. That's awesome. And I'm not sure if this is a Darren or an Ian question, but when it comes to club sponsorship, again, with the community engagement angle, have you guys been able to find any people who are keen to help out or, lend a hand in any way?
We have had some success, yes, and when I say some success, a little success. We've got a lot of room for growth, but we were very fortunate to be able to create a relationship with one of the local microbreweries here in Richmond to sponsor our tournament last year. Hardywood Brewing were very kind to step in and to allow us to use their facility for the after tournament presentations and socialization. They've been our biggest sponsor thus far. We have a couple of other irons in the fire and a couple of other folks who've stepped up to suggest they'd like to support us, but we're still working through that.
Yeah, well, as they say, Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither was Richmond.
No, and Hardywood's a great sponsor, just given the fact that the owners of the brewery got their inspiration from a tree when they were living in Australia. The Hardywood tree was I forget the locality. Where was it, Darren? It was
it actually Hardywood was actually a sheep station in New South Wales that these two two owners of the brewery now spent time in their, I believe, gap year and travel with their families. And these guys happened to brew their own beer at the sheep station because it was too far away to go down to the shops to get some. So they thought, this is a great idea. Let's go back to the US and maybe make some of our own. And that was where that
pretty
came
funny.
from.
Yeah, they took their logo from a tree they were at out there, a big old tree, and they came back to brew some beer. But they brew excellent beer and are kind of a staple in the Richmond and just greater Virginia area that's really well known. So Darren's, I think, being a little modest when he says a little bit of sponsorship. No, Hardywood's a big partner in the area and really going to help us get some brand recognition with their support.
And Hardywood are actually one of the original breweries here in Richmond in this microbrewery movement. The Richmond scene is becoming very well known nationally and beyond as far as a location. It seems there's new breweries popping up every month, and it makes for a very interesting visit to the city if you want to come down and do the brewery tour, the brewery trail.
A brewery trail, that's what I love. As long as I get buggied around to each one, I'm good.
Well, you can walk to them; they're that close together.
That's pretty good. I know, when we talk about sponsorship, we talk, we think about financial gain from those sorts of things, but it's not always about the finance and the money in the bank, because it's quite obvious to anyone who's listening that you guys have a long-term goal in mind, and it's not just about buying a set of jumpers for this year. It's about developing a whole organization around a community, and partnerships and sponsorships, they get interchanged. Yeah, it's great that some will tip in a few dollars into the club fund to help out with those sort of things, but it's also sometimes the connections they can make, as any long-term administrator would probably attest to. So well done there. So as we move forward, we'll expect to see you pop up at a few of those little tournaments down the East Coast, and maybe even make a cameo over there to Cincinnati for the Eastern Regionals, yes?
I will definitely be sending some to regionals. Not sure how many yet, but I'm certain that there will be a representation.
I'm planning on it. I mean, I'm an interchange for hire. I've been bitten by the bug. I'm back, so I got to get my fitness up a bit. But I told Darren I have a 5-year plan. It's to kick a 50-meter goal on the full. So that's my 5-year plan. But that means I'm committed to Richmond footy going forward. So really happy to be in the fold and working with some people moving forward, and super excited for the potential that Richmond has to be a awesome addition to the USAFL club and the Atlantic Seaboard.
Yeah, and I reckon as long as they've got guys like you two, you guys will be in good hands. So
thanks very much, Rick.
Thanks, Rick.
It's fun for us to be involved, and actually just need to make a shout out to the other clubs that we've been able to be involved with so far. We've found nothing but encouragement and support from the guys that we've managed to play with, and there's been actually opportunities to play with clubs at nationals. There was only 2 of us who came from Richmond to Florida last year, and we managed to team up with guys from Minnesota and Seattle and Baton Rouge. So everyone's been very welcoming and very encouraging and helping point us in the right direction.
Well, that's excellent, guys. And getting things done together is the way it's still happening in US footy, as we probably are aware. We can't survive without each other, and we can't move forward without the same sort of help. So good luck, guys. It's been absolutely fantastic to talk to you both, Darren and Ian. And anyone who wants to reach out to RVA Lions, they can do so through Facebook, I presume, Instagram, and on Twitter.
Mm-hmm. That's true. RVA Lions.
All right, excellent. And we'll look forward to seeing you out on the park again, Darren.
Absolutely. Back at you, Chris.
And Ian.
You got it.
All right.
Can't wait.
Come at me, mate. No worries.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you soon, okay?
All right.
Take care, Rick.
Outside 50 is brought to you with the help of Play Aussie USA. Play Aussie is the only place in the USA you can buy the famous Sharon Football, a proud sponsor of the USAFL. Visit them at playaussie.com.